Every morning, at precisely 7 a.m., Emily fastened her apron and tucked her hair into a messy bun as she stepped into Rosie's diner. The little corner cafe, nestled between an old pharmacy and a laundry shop in a forgotten part of town. Place was her world-worn-out linoleum floors, a broken jukebox that only played Elvis Presley, and booths patched with duct tape. It was honest work, and she was grateful for every dollar she earned. Her mother's heart medication wasn't cheap, and her younger brother's tuition bills kept piling up. But Emily never complained. She poured coffee with a smile and remembered how each customer liked their eggs. The regulars adored her, especially old Mr. Jenkins, who swore she made the best pancakes in the state. But on a cold, gray Tuesday morning, just as she flipped the open sign and unlocked the door, a sleek black car pulled up, gleaming and foreign against the backdrop of cracked pavement, and outstepped a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His jaw set like granite, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. From the passenger side, he carefully lifted out a young boy in a wheelchair, maybe 8 years old, thin and pale, with trembling hands and a sadness in his eyes that made Emily's heart ache. She smiled politely as they entered, but the man said nothing, only guided the boy to a corner booth and sat beside him, opening a laptop and typing furiously, while the boy stared at the menu with unsteady hands. Emily approached with her notepad and greeted them warmly, asking the boy what he'd like to eat. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His fingers jerked slightly as he tried to hold the menu. The man glanced up briefly, muttered scrambled eggs, toast, apple juice, then returned to his screen. Emily nodded and hurried off, but she couldn't shake the image of the boy's hands twitching, his face tense with frustration, as if even reading was a battle. When she returned with the food, she placed it gently in front of him and asked if he needed help. The father's head snapped up, his tone sharp as a blade. "He's fine." But the boy looked at Emily with pleading eyes, so she knelt beside him and whispered, "Would it be okay if I helped just a little?" The boy nodded. Emily glanced at the father, who hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. Gently, she scooped up a spoonful of eggs and brought it to the boy's lips, encouraging him with soft praise. Bite by bite, the boy relaxed. By the end of the meal, he smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you." Emily's heart swelled. The father rose, pulled out a $100 bill, placed it under the plate, and without another word, wheeled his son out the door. That should have been the end of it. Another odd customer, another memory, but they came back the next day, and the day after, always at 7 a.m., always the same booth, always the same silent routine. Emily didn't ask questions. She simply smiled, greeted the boy Tomas. She'd learned and fed him breakfast with the same patient grace. Each day, the boy spoke a little more. One day, he said, "I like your voice." Another day, he asked, "Do you think I can ever eat by myself?" Emily knelt beside him and said, "Of course you can. Let's try together." She placed the spoon in his hand and guided it slowly, clumsily, toward his mouth. It took minutes. Food spilled. But when he got that one bite in on his own, he beamed like he'd won a gold medal. Emily clapped and said, "See, you're stronger than you think." The father, always silent, always watching from the shadows of his unreadable face, never interfered. But that day, as he wheeled Thomas out, he paused by the counter and placed a crisp business card down. Andrew Locke, it read. Emily's eyes widened. That name sounded familiar. Andrew Locke wasn't just any man. He was the Andrew Locke, billionaire tech mogul, CEO of Locke Systems, a robotics empire that powered half the world's AI. She stared at the photo's stern face in Forbes. The headlines about his wife's death in a tragic car crash 3 years ago, the accident that left his only son paralyzed from the waist down, a man who had disappeared from the public eye, who hadn't spoken to the media in years. What was he doing in her rundown diner? Why was he letting a waitress feed his son? The next morning, they didn't come, nor the next. Emily felt a strange emptiness in the booth where Thomas used to sit. Days passed, then weeks. Life returned to normal, but she found herself staring at the door every morning at 7 o'clock, hoping. Sometimes she even set an extra place at the booth, just in case. She missed a way. Thomas's eyes lit up when he saw her, the trust in his small voice, the progress that made her believe in miracles. Her coworkers teased her gently. "You got a little boyfriend now." But she only smiled and shook her head, though inside she felt something she couldn't quite name. Then one stormy Thursday, as thunder rolled over the rooftops and rain lashed the windows, a car pulled up again. The door opened, and in walked Andrew Locke, soaked to the bone, holding a letter in his hand. Emily stared in shock. "I owe you an explanation," he said, quietly. "You did more for my son in a week than every specialist I've paid in 3 years. You didn't see a problem, you saw him. That's why I'm here." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a job offer, a number that made her knees wobble, a personal position to care for Thomas's full time at their estate, a salary more than she'd make in 10 years, full medical benefits, education assistance, housing, everything. "Why me?" she asked. Andrew's reply was simple. "Because he smiled with you. Emily didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the rain, the familiar street, where she'd spent her entire adult life, and felt the weight of choice settle on her shoulders. That night, she sat in the silence of her apartment, listening to her mother's coughing from the next room, watching her brother asleep on the couch with his textbooks scattered across his chest. She looked at the letter again and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, as the sun rose behind stormy clouds, she picked up the phone, dialed the number on the card, and with a trembling but firm voice, said yes. And just like that, the girl who once served coffee with shaky hands stepped into a mansion of marble floors and silent halls, into a life she never imagined, but one she was born to transform. Emily arrived at the Locke estate on a breezy Monday morning, unsure whether to feel excited or terrified. The gates were taller than anything she'd ever seen. Black wrought iron wrapped in silence, guarded by cameras she didn't dare look directly at, and the driveway curved through a garden so immense it felt more like a private nature reserve than someone's home. Her palms were sweating as the driver, kind, silent man named Jordan, pulled up to the grand circular entryway, where white stone pillars framed a house that looked like something out of a dream. She stepped out, clutching her single duffel bag, trying not to stare at the carved fountain that glistened under the morning sun, or the sheer number of windows that reflected the sky like pieces of a puzzle. A tall woman in a navy suit greeted her at the door. "Welcome, Miss Emily. I'm Serena, Mr. Locke's estate manager. I'll show you to your quarters." Quarters, the word sounded surreal. She followed Serena through high-ceilinged hallways, lined with paintings she was afraid to breathe near, their golden frames stretching like centuries of stories. She was shown to a guest wing. Though it was larger than any apartment she'd lived in, soft gray walls, a bed big enough for 5 Emily's, and windows that opened to the sound of birds and the scent of lilacs. After a brief tour and a rundown of the house rules, Emily asked the only question she really cared about: "Where's Thomas?" Serena smiled faintly and nodded. "He's in the East Garden with Mr. Locke." Heart pounding, Emily stepped out into the morning light and followed the path down a stone walkway, past hedges and koi ponds, until she heard laughter, soft, hesitant, but unmistakably his. There he was, under a blossoming cherry tree, in his wheelchair, with a paintbrush in his hand, while Andrew Locke sat across from him with a sketch pad, surprisingly relaxed. Thomas saw her first. "Emily," he shouted, waving his free hand, with such joy that it made her eyes sting. Kanju looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment, then nodded once in greeting. "You came," he said, she smiled, setting her bag down gently. Of course I did. That moment marked the beginning of a life neither of them had expected. Emily's role wasn't just caretaker, was confidant, cheerleader, and steady hand in a home still haunted by quiet grief. Mornings began with stretching exercises for Thomas, followed by meals where Emily encouraged him to try new utensils designed by lock systems engineers. She introduced games where every move helped develop motor coordination, but never once made it feel like therapy. Thomas, who once barely spoke, now asked questions nonstop. What's your favorite book? Can robots feel sadness? Do you think birds get scared of falling? And Emily answered each one with stories, jokes, and the kind of gentle honesty only someone who's known hardship could give. Andrew often watched from the sidelines, silent but attentive. Sometimes he would disappear for hours to handle business, but more and more he began joining their meals, listening in on their silly conversations. And one evening, after Emily told a story about her brother pretending to be a superhero to scare off debt collectors, Andrew actually laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a full-bodied, surprised laugh that startled even him. Emily looked at him in that moment and realized something profound. Behind the billionaire was a man who had locked himself in a fortress of numbers and expectations because grief had shattered everything human inside him. And now, piece by piece, she was watching those walls begin to crack. One night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Thomas had trouble sleeping. Emily sat beside him in the dim light of his room, telling him a made-up bedtime story about a lion who couldn't roar but saved his jungle with kindness anyway. Thomas giggled, eyes heavy, and asked, "Do you think my mom would have liked you?" The question hit her chest like a stone. "I hope so," she whispered. Andrew was standing in the hallway, just out of sight, and Emily didn't know he had heard that. But the next morning, a framed photo appeared on the hallway shelf near Thomas's room, his mother, radiant and smiling, with Thomas as a baby in her arms. "He hasn't seen her photo in years," Serena whispered when Emily asked. "It disappeared after the funeral. Mr. Locke must have put it there." The emotional thaw in the mansion was slow but steady. Andrew started taking breaks during the day to eat lunch with them in the garden. He asked Emily questions about her family, her life before the diner, her dreams. She told him everything about her mom's diagnosis, about how her father abandoned them, about how she worked 3 jobs in high school to keep the lights on, about how she wanted to be a teacher once, but life had other plans. Andrew listened, truly listened, in a way that made her feel seen, in a way no man had ever done. Then, one afternoon, Thomas did something that stunned them all. He stood, with braces attached to his legs and the support of a robotic exoskeleton designed by his father's engineers, and Emily's hands holding his for balance. He rose shakily to his feet, took one trembling step forward, and laughed. Andrew dropped the tablet he was holding, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, look, I'm doing it," Thomas cried. Andrew ran to him, falling to his knees beside his son, wrapping his arms around him, sobbing into his hair. Emily stood there, hands over her mouth, tears pouring freely. In that moment, something shifted between them, not just the miracle of Thomas's progress, but the realization that this wasn't just a job anymore. They were a family in the making. Later that night, Andrew asked her to walk with him in the garden. The moon was high, casting silver light on the path. "I've seen dozens of therapists," he began. "I've spent millions on treatments, on specialists, but you gave him back his joy. You gave me back my son." Emily looked at him, unsure what to say. "I just cared," she whispered. "That's all I did." He shook his head. "No, Emily, you believed. That's different." He paused, reaching into his coat. "I have something for you." It was a necklace, simple, gold, with a tiny heart-shaped locket. "It belonged to my wife. She would have wanted you to have it." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Can't accept this, you already have," he interrupted gently. "Not the necklace, our gratitude, our hearts." And for the first time, Emily let him pull her into an embrace. Warm and trembling, not romantic yet, but heavy with a depth of connection deeper than words. That night, she stared at the locket beside her bed, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the strange, beautiful journey her life had taken. From a diner girl with calloused hands to a woman helping heal a broken dynasty, she was no longer someone people looked past. She had become the center of something vast and healing. But even as the mansion began to fill with light, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, something that would test the strength of this fragile new family in ways none of them could yet imagine. The months that followed brought a rhythm. None of them had ever known quiet breakfasts on the terrace, therapy sessions filled with laughter, and evenings where music replaced the echoes of sorrow that once haunted the halls of the Locke mansion. And though Emily had stepped into that home as a caretaker, she quickly became the heart of it, her presence turning cold marble into warm memories, her laughter bringing color to walls that once echoed only silence, and Thomas, with his robotic braces and endless curiosity, blossomed under her care, his vocabulary expanding as fast as his confidence, often surprising even the therapists with how willing he was to try. To fall, to try again, and through every stumble, every trembling step, Emily was there, never forcing, never pitying, only believing, cheering him on with the same quiet strength that had carried her through a life of hardship. While Andrew, watching from the edges of every moment at first, slowly found himself unable to resist being drawn into the warmth that had returned to his home, not because he was lonely, but because he was finally learning what connection truly meant. And though his wealth could build towers and satellites, it had taken this one woman, this waitress with tired eyes and a golden heart, to rebuild a home he thought he had lost forever. But as with all beautiful things, the world began to notice. First with curious glances from neighbors at the gate, then with blurry paparazzi shots from faraway hills. Until one morning, Emily opened her phone and saw a viral photo, her pushing Thomas's wheelchair through the botanical garden. Andrew, walking beside them with a rare, unguarded smile, and the headlines screamed, "Who is the woman who changed Andrew Locke?" From diner to dynasty, Emily's rise inside the mansion. And with that attention came chaos. News vans stationed outside the estate, drones buzzing overhead, and journalists offering money to anyone from her past, even visiting her old diner, asking about her childhood, her family, whether she had some hidden ambition to marry into money. And while Emily tried to stay calm, it all overwhelmed her. The fame she never wanted, becoming a storm, threatening the peace she had helped create. And Andrew, protective by nature, tried to fight it, hired security, blocked inquiries, issued statements, but Emily, braver than she looked, suggested something different, something bold, that they tell their story themselves. Not to chase fame, but to protect the truth, to use the noise to amplify something good. And so, one soft spring afternoon, they sat together in the garden under a canopy of wisteria, facing cameras, not as CEO and caretaker, but as two people who had collided at life's lowest point and somehow built something worth preserving. And Emily, with her hands folded and voice steady, told the world what she saw the day she met Thomas, that he wasn't a symbol of tragedy, but of resilience. That love had bloomed not from wealth, but from witnessing someone struggle and choosing to help without condition. While Andrew admitted to the guilt that had paralyzed him for years, to the loneliness he hadn't even recognized until a waitress stood in his kitchen and reminded him what kindness looked like. And the interview, raw and unfiltered, reached millions in days, inspiring thousands of letters, donations, volunteers, parents who wrote in saying they finally felt seen, finally felt hope again. And the Locke Foundation which they built together with the mission to fund affordable mobility tech for children and single parents, grew into something global. With research labs, outreach programs, and therapy centers in cities that had once been overlooked. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows. And one arrived in the form of Vanessa Hale, Andrew's estranged sister-in-law, who showed up at the estate gates with lawyers and a bitter smile, claiming that Emily was manipulating Andrew, that she was trying to replace Thomas's mother, that Andrew had been mentally unfit since the crash, and that control of the company and even custody of Thomas needed to be reviewed. And the accusation landed like a blow to the chest, shaking everything they had carefully built, bringing in investigators, family court evaluators, even headlines questioning whether love could ever be pure inside a billionaire's mansion. But while Andrew braced for battle and lawyers sharpened their knives, it was Emily who steadied the ship, answering every question with dignity, allowing child welfare agents to observe her time with Thomas, never once raising her voice, never once defending herself out of anger, because she knew that real love didn't need to perform, it only needed to be witnessed. And slowly, one by one, the lies fell apart. Vanessa exposed for draining the family trust in secret, the court's ruling in Andrew's favor. The foundation cleared, and the press turning their fascination elsewhere. But the damage, though dismissed on paper, had left invisible bruises, and Emily, in rare moments, alone, sometimes wondered if she truly belonged, if perhaps their worlds were never meant to merge. But Thomas, as always, became her anchor, sensing her quiet sorrow, crawling into her lap one night and whispering, "You're my real home." And that was all it took. That small voice, full of truth, to remind her that she hadn't come this far just to run from shadows. And not long after, in the quiet after a rainstorm, Andrew found her in the garden, knelt beside her in the same spot where they first watched Thomas walk on his own, and with hands trembling, not from doubt, but from hope, he held out a simple ring and asked her to marry him, not as a fairy tale ending, but as a beginning they would write together. And Emily, eyes brimming with tears, said yes with a whisper that echoed across every wound she had ever healed. And their wedding, held under the trees with only Thomas, Serena, a few friends, and dozens of handwritten letters from families they had helped, became a moment of pure joy, with Thomas walking her down the aisle, grinning in a tiny blue suit, while Emily, in a dress simple as moonlight, vowed not just to love Andrew, but to always fight for the boy who had shown her what courage looked like. And that night, as they danced beneath strings of fairy lights and soft music played from a cello in the corner, Emily looked around at this life she never expected and realized that the mansion no longer felt like a palace, it felt like a home. A warm, lived-in miracle, built not with marble and gold, but with forgiveness, compassion, and one impossible act of faith that began in a diner when she fed a boy who couldn't hold a spoon. And as years passed and Thomas grew taller, needing his braces less and less, they continued to build, opening more centers, funding research, mentoring other families, with Emily often invited to speak at conferences, not as a symbol, but as a force, a woman who had crossed the chasm of poverty, loss, and doubt, and built a bridge others could walk across. And Andrew, once a recluse, haunted by tragedy, became the face of what redemption could look like when pride was set aside, while Thomas, now walking confidently with only a cane, began speaking at foundation events, telling his own story with humor and heart, often ending by saying, "I got better, not because machines, but because people didn't give up on me." And every time, Emily wiped away a tear and held Andrew's hand, knowing that in a world that often values money over meaning, they had chosen something better. And though the headlines eventually faded and new scandals filled the screens, their legacy endured not as a trending topic, but as changed lives. And on the rare quiet nights when the world outside seemed to pause, Andrew and Emily would sit under the stars, watching Thomas sleep peacefully, and wonder how fate had brought them together from opposite ends of the world, broken in different ways, to form something so whole, so needed, and so beautiful. And though they knew life would bring more storms, more unexpected turns, they also knew one truth deeper than any headline, that love, when chosen again and again, through fear and failure, could rebuild anything, even a billionaire's broken home, even a waitress's forgotten dream, even the future of a little boy who once needed help just to eat his breakfast.